too, because I do a lot of bands and their environment is wherever I put them. In portraits, they're just a lot more fun out on location. We'll talk about that. This is going to be rather short because it is kind of tips and tricks, but it's designed so you guys ask questions as we go. And if it's something that I'm going to cover, I'll say, hold that thought, we're going to cover that in a second. So let me tell you a little bit about me, which maybe not.
Which way did you go with the mouse?
Oh, I know what I did. Wrong button. Yeah, so as Dom said, I'm a professional photographer. I do a lot of editorial portraits, band promos, commercial work, advertising work, and a lot of boring stuff, but the boring stuff is what really pays the bills. The band stuff's the most fun, but it's hard to get bands to pay you to do photos. I can never say this word, so you're just gonna have to read it. That with an SWPP. The SWPP is Society of Wedding and Portrait Photographers. It's underneath the BPPA, which is British Professional Photographers Association, which is a bit misleading because anybody can join it. I recommend that everybody check it out. It's bppa.co.uk, I think, or .org, I'm not sure. But it's very beneficial. I shouldn't be really promoting them. I'm not paid to promote them, but I love the societies. You can learn tons from them. It's £100 a year. You can enter competitions. You can get qualifications. And that's that. It's really good society. They have competitions which you win awards, and then you can say, I'm an award-winning photographer, and then I'm an all-around nice guy. So that's about me. So this is what we're going to talk about. Why shooting on location? It's a lot more fun, but we'll get into that in a minute. How to use the environment to your advantage. The most fun thing about shooting on location is being able to tell a story with where you're doing the photos at. Some of the common mistakes people make with location portraits, and this is going to be the part where I definitely want you guys to ask questions, because there's lots of little tips and tricks that you can learn that will make your photos a million times better. You may not even realize you were doing before. And I'll have examples of the bad ones here later. What to do about the sun when you're out on location, or lack thereof sun, and the legal stuff, which is going to tie into last month's, if anybody was here for last month when he talked about legal stuff on street photography. I'll give you some personal experience with some of the stuff that he talked about. All right. So the reason why you want to shoot on location, studios can be a bit boring. Most studios around here are going to be rather small, and you're only going to have a selection of 6, 7, 8 different backdrops. You're not going to have a lot of variety. You can still do a lot of different things in a studio, but you are limited unless you get into big warehouse type of studios where you can build sets. But then you're getting into environmental portraiture, which is what we're talking about. So studios, you're limited. Environment, you're only as limited to where you don't want to travel to. East Anglia, you're kind of a bit limited, but when you're shooting people, when you're photographing people, you'll find that if you bring them out into the street, or you bring them out into a park, or you bring them to Jesus Green, wherever, they're going to be much more at ease with you out and about than they are in your studio. Your studio, even though you might not think of it, or even your house, your living room, wherever it is, the person that you're taking a portrait of considers that your domain. And they're automatically, if they're the little gun shy in front of the camera, they're going to be even a little bit more reserved because they're in your territory. If you bring them out on location, you're in neutral ground. There's more people milling about. They can walk around. You can explore, travel. They're much more at ease. The one downside is there are lots more people milling about, and I always tell people, because I make quite a production when I do portraits out on location, and I always tell people that I set up lights and all this crap, and it draws a crowd sometimes. So if people are a bit embarrassed, it does become an issue sometimes. But amazingly, most people just kind of ignore it, because you have fun when you're out on location, because you can go, oh, I want you to climb all the way up on that tower and lean over the railing. You're like, okay. They don't care who's looking at them anymore. The environment, and this is the fun part with doing portraits out on location, is you can use the environment to tell a story. It makes such a big difference between, if you took a full-length portrait of somebody against the wall, that tells one story. But if you do the same thing in 5 different environments, it's 5 different stories. Even with the same person, it's 5 completely different images. And that's what photography is all about. It's taking a picture that tells a story, that makes you want to think and go, what was going on here? What's this guy trying to say? Who is the guy in the photo? All right, so how do you choose the environment you want to shoot in, and how do you use it to your advantage? Well, you want a background that's going to complement your photo but not distract from your photo. And this is a big problem that some people have. This photo here, I'll try to get out of the way. Which one's the pointer on this, Dom?
It's the kind of...
Well, I don't need to really...
It's right in the middle.
If I were to have taken... This is a DJ from London. If I were to take him and place him in the middle of all this graffiti, it would be a horrible photo because he would just be lost in the sea of madness that's really surrounding him. So what you want to do with things like this is use the things around you to your advantage. If you look at the way this graffiti is, it's all leading right to him. And it's just a matter of changing the perspective of your camera. So if a wall here, if you shoot it dead on, it's going to be parallel, but if you just angle a little bit, those lines converge that way, and you can use it to lead into him. You can use different things out in the environment as posing tools, and this is what also really helps with making people more comfortable. Say you have a couple that's newly married, they've been together 6 months, they want nice couple portraits. You can use a whole, if one of them's nervous, you can use a whole variety of things to calm them down. And one is by just using things to pose them on. A set of stairs, have them sit on the stairs. A tree stump that's fallen over, you can use that by either having them lean against it, sit down on it. You can use anything that's out there as things to help pose and make people comfortable. People are more comfortable when they're leaning or sitting or squatting. If they're standing out in the open like this, they're not. And that's part of the problem with the studio, especially with high-key studios like Venture. They have you standing about this far from the wall so they can make that white. You're just like standing out in a big open space feeling naked. I kind of talked about this, but using the environment, using lead-in lines and things like that, there are so many things that I'm a big fan. You'll see, if you saw the first set of photos, I do a lot of full body portraits. It's very rare that I do head and shoulders and things like that. This photo is using the rule of thirds, if you guys know what that is. A lot of mine don't use that. I put them dead center, but that's because I do a lot of stuff down alleyways and streets. And so I use the lines in the streets and lines in the buildings that all go right to the middle of the picture. You want things that's going to move your eye to the subject. And I mean, even if you look down there, railings on stairs, there's so many things that you can use to lead the eye. This is a big one. When you find the spot that you want to do your picture in, make sure there's empty space to put your subject in. And the reason I say that is because in the examples coming up, people don't pay attention to the things that are back there. And you'll have a nice portrait of somebody with a tree coming right out of the top of their head, or telephone line going right through their head. Make sure there's space to put them that's not going to interfere with the picture. Like in this one, there's stuff over here, but the way that I did the lighting, I kind of made it so it's not really there anymore. But I left space for him to be in the photo and not be distracted by everything else.
Will you explain the lighting before, after?
Yes, I can. If you have any questions about the lighting, feel free to ask. I cover a very tiny bit in this, but I'll gladly talk about any of it. All right, yeah, common mistakes people make. The biggest one is the background being too busy and too distracting. That previous picture, like I said, if I would have stuck him up against the wall, he would have just been lost. No matter what I did with the lighting, because the graffiti was white and bright and there's all the lines, you would have just struggled to find him. Your eye would have been constantly wandering all over the place. And you want your eye to just kind of move into 3 different spots. You want it to kind of go in a circle, not go, I don't know where to go. Trees and objects growing on people's heads. That is seriously the biggest problem that people have with doing portraits on location. And it's so easy to fix. Before you hit the shutter, just look in your viewfinder and just see if you see anything. I mean, it's hard to do because you're so used to, most people focus on the person they're photographing. They're like, oh, that's a lovely pose. And they hit the shutter and they didn't see the lorry coming at the back of their head or something like that. just stop. It takes only 1 second. Just browse the viewfinder, especially around the head area. Around here, it's not such a big deal if you got like a tree trunk that's going through here behind them or something. It's acceptable. It's not. I mean, it's not good, but it's better than telephone line through the head or flowers growing out of the head. And I got some examples of that coming up. And I hope that none of your photos, no, they're not anybody's photos. Another one, and this is a really common mistake because especially if people don't have lights or reflectors, they think the best thing to do is have the sunlight on the person's face. It's the worst thing you can do because then they can be like this, squinting. And it just makes for a horrible photo. And especially if it's summer and like noon, not only are they going to be squinting, but their eyes are going to be black because it's just going to be all shadow on the eyes. So I know it goes again, especially if you don't have lights and reflectors and things, but never facing towards the sun. Unless it's cloudy, obviously then the sun's not as bright and it's not going to make a difference. But even a sunset, if somebody's looking at the sunset, they're going to squint. And it's just not going to make for a very flattering photo. Another one is shooting from bad perspective. And this happens when people are photographing kids more than anything. And I blame point and shoot cameras for this, because how does everybody take a photo with a point and shoot camera? They go like this, and then they go like that. And they point it down. And that's quite possibly the worst angle you can photograph somebody from, is pointing the camera down at them. And with kids, people do it 95% of the time. They're standing up here taking a photo of their son, who's 3 and this tall, and all you see is a nose, some eyebrows, and maybe a chin. You have to be prepared to get a little bit dirty. I'm always lying down on the ground, especially with kids. I mean, you have to get down to their level, because if you get at eye level, that's just a much better photo. So just try to remember, get down to the level of the person that you're shooting. Sometimes it's not possible. I mean, if you're on, and it kind of leads into what I was going to say there, lens distortion. Lens distortion is sometimes a really good thing. But when you're doing environmental portrait, especially with the downward angle thing, anybody that is reasonably short doesn't want to be made look even shorter. And if you were taking a picture like this, you've just made them look even shorter than they are, and that's not good. Conversely, the opposite is true. If you're shooting up at somebody, you're making them taller, which that can be a good thing if you're going to give somebody a superhero look. You always want to kind of come from down below. But the problem with lens distortion, does everybody know what lens distortion is? Yeah? I do a lot of like really wide angle stuff, and so I always have to pay attention to this, especially shooting landscape orientated. I use an ultra wide lens quite a bit, and everything on the edges is like this. And it's just horrible. So I have to pay attention when I'm taking the photo. Okay, is everything where I want it to be, and I can get rid of that in the end, because I'm not going to fix buildings that are like this. But what would be bad is if I had buildings like this and my subject's standing right next to one. Now I've kind of ruined the picture, because I either have to crop that out and suddenly my subject's literally on the edge of the frame, or I have to try to distort that, which in turn is going to make him go like that. So you have to pay attention to lens distortion, especially with wide angle lenses. Telephoto lenses, it's not too much of an issue, to be honest, because you're usually quite far from the subject. Lens distortion becomes an issue when you're really close to a subject, and with the way I shoot, I'm always quite close. I don't have a lens that's over 55 millimeters. I've sold them all because I don't use them. I don't know. I always wanted one of those massive things, and I was like, why spend $5,000 on something I'll use to take a photo of a duck? And this also leads to bad cropping. The best rule of advice I was ever given about framing a subject when you're taking their picture is whatever bit of their body that you're cropping off, make it look intentional. Because if it doesn't, it looks bad. And what I'm talking about is like when somebody does like a quick grab, and then when they look at it, like just the top of their head's cut off. It just looks bad. So that can be fixed in Photoshop. Just crop it here, make it look intentional. But what the problem comes in is when people are doing really fast photos and they're not paying attention to elbows. Elbows are the worst. If somebody's standing like this and it's cropped here, that's bad. You got an arm going out of the picture and then coming back into the picture. Your eye is just like, what's going on with this photo? And the same is true with limbs, with joints. never crop at a joint. Your mind, you won't be thinking it, but your mind thinks, like if you have a photo of somebody, knees up, and it's literally cropped at the knees, your mind is trying to figure out whether that person is an amputee or not. You might not be thinking it, but your mind is trying to sort that out because it's just, it doesn't make sense. So go down to the shins or go up to the, never at joints, never at the waist, always up a little bit, never tops of heads, never elbows. All right, yeah, so here's the examples of the common mistakes. Like I said, I found these from this website. I thought that was quite funny, but especially this photo just cracks me up. I know that it's not, this is actually in a studio. This is some backdrop. But the placement of that mountain is just, it's just not right. Yeah, sorry, I mean,
did anyone take these photos by the way?
Yeah, I was hoping that. This photo's got it from like 1985 or something. Yeah, this is somebody looking into the sun. That's just what's going to happen. You don't want that. This one here, I put up because it's got just about every single thing that I just talked about wrong with it. This background that she is on is just so busy and so distracting. There's lines everywhere. Your eye, my eye at least, it doesn't stay on her. It's constantly moving around because you got all these trees going in circles, and then this path here, and you have this tree cutting through her head, you have this tree cutting through her hand. It's just, there's just too much going on. The better, and then sticking her, so this, what this does, this is a bad one as well, because it splits the photo in two. You suddenly have two planes of the photo. You don't want anything like that cutting in front of your subject. And if you do, you want it to take up the rest of the photo. Like a balcony or something like that. If somebody's standing over a balcony, that's fine. But if you have like just one railing going through, you've just done a weird dissection of your subject, so to speak. I mean, this photo, they could have done so many things with this besides what they did. They could have had her lie on this, sit on this one here, just come in front of this. There's a lot they could have done. This, I meant to mention this before, this is another very, 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 very common problem. Horizons, and people having the horizons go right here. And that's exactly what's going on here with where the beach and the water meet. This one could have been easily fixed because it's a beach and a horizon. It's probably 10 meters away from them. They could have just gotten close to the water, and that would have brought the water level way down. Horizons are a bit of an issue because you can't go closer to the horizon. It's never going to come closer. But what you can do is just change your level. If you go down lower, the horizon goes up. You go up higher, the horizon goes down. Just change your perspective, and that's going to change where the horizon is intersecting with the person. You're going to have the horizon intersect. You just don't want to go right through her ears. And then this photo, I mean, this is a bad perspective. There's a lot of cropping. We go right through her knee here, we go right through her feet there. And because of the perspective this was taken at, this was somebody, they were sitting down, and whoever it was, I'm going to say mom, was standing up, took the photo like that. The problem is it scrunches everybody down, like I said earlier, but it also hides the person in the back of it. If they would have gotten down lower, that raises that person up, and everybody gets a bigger piece of the pie in the photo. As it stands, she's just a head sticking out over everybody's shoulder. All right, the sun. Because I told you, don't face them towards the sun, so now you're probably like, what the hell am I supposed to do? Well, again, I'm going to reiterate that because I think it's so important. Don't face them towards the sun. You end up with squinty eyes. So what you can do is shoot in the shade, or shoot so the sun's behind them. I almost always shoot with the sun behind them, or at least off to the side behind them. And the reason is that when I shoot out on location, I'm always using flashes. I always bring 2 different lights with me. But if the sun's out, and especially in winter you can shoot any time of the day because the sun's always low. If the sun's low, like in winter, and it's not cloudy, I usually use the sun as a second light, and I only have to set up 1 light, which is pretty nice. and especially if kids are involved, because kids have no patience for a reflector, let alone 2 lights. So use reflectors or lighting. I'll talk about, when I talk about lighting here in a minute, the disadvantages to reflectors. I'm not a terribly big fan of using just the reflector, and I'll explain why. But yeah, because we're not using the sun as the light source for the face, because you don't want them squinting, you want them as bright-eyed as possible. There is a way around the squinting thing, but I don't want to tell you because I don't want you shooting people facing the sun. But if you must, I'll give you a little tip. If you must shoot somebody facing the sun, before you hit the shutter, tell them to close their eyes. Count to 3, open your eyes, take the photo. They won't be squinting, but they will be blinded.
Which means they can't complain about the photo.
That's right. They will have no idea what just happened. But they won't be squinting. And I used to shoot weddings. I don't shoot weddings anymore. I hate weddings. But when you shoot weddings, you have no choice with the sun thing sometimes, because you're at the mercy of where the bride wants her photos taken. She wants her photos taken in the front of the church and the sun's right there. You have no choice. So that's where that trick comes into play. Just close your eyes, count to 3, open, hit the shutter. But other than that, don't shoot them facing the sun. Use reflectors or lighting. And we'll talk about lighting. You can ask me any questions you want about lighting, I'll help you out. And this is where I'll talk about it just briefly. Does anybody here use reflectors or lighting when they're out and about doing anything? A couple people. All right. Well, when you use flash off camera, this is going to sound wrong, but everything on your camera changes. You cannot, well, you can, but you shouldn't shoot anything except manual mode when you're using off-camera flash. And the reason is because the aperture and the shutter suddenly do 2 very important but separate things. Your shutter is now in charge of how bright the ambient light is, and your flash is in charge of how bright your flash is. So if you shoot aperture priority mode, which means you have a fixed aperture and you're letting it decide on the shutter, you have no control over how bright these lights are. Your flash, you do. And then the opposite is true. If you shoot shutter priority, which means you've set a shutter speed of 200th of a second, ambient light's perfect, now your flash is like, depending on if the sun's going away, coming in, you have no control over your flash anymore, unless you can go up to it and go, okay, 1/16, okay, da-da-da. But your aperture's just changed, and now that's changed. And so you have to shoot manual mode if you want full control. And this is also why I don't like reflectors. Well, reflectors on their own, because it's the same as ambient light. If you're using a reflector in just the sun, it's ambient light. The problem with that is if it's low ambient light, you're going to have to use slow shutter speeds, which means you're going to end up with some blur, or you crank up the ISO so you can get high shutter speed, but now you end up with lots of noise. Reflectors with flash, though, I'm a big fan of. You can use them. Anybody have any questions while we're talking about lighting? Feel free to. No.
Do you take an assistant?
Sometimes. Sometimes I wish I did, because wind is a big issue. I can't tell you how many flashes I've broken because my flash stands have gotten knocked from the wind. I lost one over a bridge in London. It's a true story. I'll go back. That one of those first photos on there was. Anybody know Brick Lane in London? There's the most awesome place I've ever seen is off of Brick Lane, and there's this really cool bridge that goes over, I think it's the London Overground train lines that it goes over, but either way, it's only a wall like this high, and we had my stands up. I had an assistant this day actually as well. He didn't do his job, because I was over here, my flash over here, and I just saw it go hit the edge and right over. That was a 100-pound softbox and my light and the stand all on the train tracks. Anybody else? Any other questions?
I was actually going to ask about do you modify the lights, or do you have like softbox
yes.
flashes and stuff?
Yeah, my favorite modifier is it's called Westcott Apollo. It's a softbox, but it folds like an umbrella, which is amazing because if anybody's tried to put together a softbox, it's the most ridiculous thing you'll ever do in your life. I have one, I put it together, I've never taken it apart because I do not want to put it back together. So the Westcott Apollo, it's like an umbrella. It's the most brilliant thing ever. You just flip it over to flash. That's my favorite modifier, and then I have just an umbrella that's flaggable though, which by flaggable I mean it's got a cover that I can take off bits, so I can use half of it or all of it. And then I have various homemade things. I have a homemade beauty dish that doesn't particularly work very well, but a homemade snoot that does work very well. Pringles tubes are the greatest snoots ever. If anybody doesn't know what a snoot is, it's just a tube that makes your light go that way, and that's it. It doesn't go spreading out, it's just Pringles cans are brilliant at that. Anyone else? You sure? Am I going too fast? Am I boring? No. All right.
No, not boring at all.
Okay. Yeah, what I was saying earlier about the light, the sunlight, and this is again why you really need to pay attention to the sun, because any of you guys do end up doing like family portraits and things like that, you're never going to be able to schedule your portraits for the best time of day. And the best time of day is obviously, my rule of thumb, when your shadow on the ground is longer than you are tall. That's when the light's really good. But you can't always schedule it. You're never going to get a family to say, oh, 3:30, yeah, that's perfect, but my son sleeps at that time. What about noon? Noon's the worst time, but you have to deal with it. And especially, like, I do a lot of stuff for like businesses, and I have to do what they say. If they say 12:30 in June, I have to do 12:30 in June. So you just have to learn how to deal with the light and make it work. The legal stuff.
So before we go to legal stuff,
Yes.
what
Your voice sounds like it's coming from up there, so I'm like.
Yeah. So what do you make with the light in a kind of in June with midday in June?
I'm sorry, what was that?
What did you midday in June?
What do you mean?
I mean, what can you do with light? I mean, how can you deal with it?
That's when, yeah, okay, actually that's a very good question, because that brings us back a little bit. Remember how I said shutter speed controls the ambient light? Well, that's where shooting midday and noon comes in handy. How can I?
Go back.
Yeah. We'll come back to that slide. Damn PCs, where's the button?
F5.
This photo here, actually, well, this is a better example. This is the one this is the one where I lost my flash off the bridge, by the way. This one here. This photo is a good example. Even though it's cloudy, this was taken at about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And that's where the shutter speed and shooting in manual is so important, because I know I use two lights on this photo. One I don't know if you can see from back there because it's quite small, but I used one to kind of rim him a little bit. There's a bit of light surrounding him over on the sides. And then I used one camera left quite high. Because I know I'm using the lights, that's what's going to light him. I can underexpose everything else to the level I want. And that's where understanding how the shutter controls the ambient light is very important. So, and knowing what your high speeds, does anybody know what high speed sync is? If you don't, high speed sync is, I won't get into technical things, but it's basically how fast, what's the fastest shutter speed you can use with flash. And you'll know that you've gone too fast when there's a black bar on your photo. And a lot of people will see that black bar and think, and fairly enough, the first instinct is, where did this shadow come from? Because it looks like a shadow. It's not. It's your shutter getting caught when the flash is going and it's going by. So my camera, I think is 1/250th of a second, which was not bright, which was not fast enough for this day, because even though it was cloudy, it was quite bright that day. So then what you do, I put on a neutral density filter on my camera to make everything a bit darker. Then 1/250th of a second was perfect for the ambient light. I got nice moody clouds. Then it's just a matter of getting the light. And I think this was 6.3, f6.3, I think. That doesn't really matter, but yeah. So I mean, that's what you can do when you have bright sun. Your shutter speed is what's going to control that. And if it's still too bright, you have filters that's the next ticket. And I end up having to use filters all the time because shooting at 1 is bright. Well, in the summer at least. Let's get back to that slide.
Shift F5.
What was that?
Shift F5.
Shift F5. All right. All right, the legal bits. Who was here for last month's when he talked about permits and all that stuff? Okay. If it's feasible, and if you think you're going to make a scene, and what I mean by make a scene is be there for more than 15, 20 minutes and you're setting up lights and you think people are going to stop. If that's something you're going to do, try to get a permit. Unless you're not getting paid, you can't afford a permit. That's a whole nother matter. But I tend to always get a permit if it's somewhere I'm going to be for an extended period of time. What I mean by that is I do a lot of stuff around Cambridge, and I kind of know I'm going to be in like 5 or 6 different places. I don't get a permit because I'll probably be in Jesus Green for 10 minutes, and I'll probably be Park Street for 5 minutes, and that's just not worth it to get a permit for that. But if you know you're going to be somewhere for a while, setting up lights, and it may cause a disturbance, get a permit. Because if you don't, you get kicked out. And if you do get kicked out, don't argue with them when they ask you to leave. If they're asking you to leave, they have reasons to be asking you to leave. I learned this the hard way at the Arc in Barrie. I was only the Arc. If anybody ever wants to do a shoot at the Arc in Barrie, don't bother wasting your time. For some reason, they're horribly strict with that place. They won't give you a permit. They won't even let you, the second they see a tripod coming out of your bag, a guy will come out of nowhere and be like, you can't put that down. And they'll tell you health and safety reasons, which the first time this happened to me, I was quite annoyed because I was fully prepared to leave because I know it's private property and all that stuff. But when he said health and safety, I was just like, health and safety? What are you talking about? Oh, somebody can trip over your tripod. What? Anyways, don't argue with them. It ends bad. And sometimes just ask for permission. You'd be surprised at how willing people are. Car parks, I for some reason do a lot of shoots in car parks, multi-story car parks, and just ask them. And then 90% of the time they say, yeah, fine, don't make a disturbance. They usually have no problem with it as long as you're not getting in people's way and you're not going to be causing people to stop and back things up. Most of the time they have no problem with it as long as you ask. It's when you don't ask that they get a bit annoyed. And that's farm and rural stuff. And the reason I bring this up is because we do live in East Anglia, and there is a lot of farms. But that also means there's a lot of really cool barns and sheds and things. I do that stuff all the time. Most of the time, you have no idea whose property this is. You have no idea who to ask. So do so at your own risk is my advice. Yeah, if you can find out whose property it is and ask them, most of the time they'll have no problem with it either. I've done that a couple of times with this place way up at Norwich, and I figured it was this house. It wasn't. The guy said, oh no, that's this guy's house, and I went and asked him, he was cool with it. Again, just ask. Sometimes you'd be surprised at the answers people give you. And this is a big one. Again, going back to last week with model releases. Before you hit the shutter, be very aware of other people besides the person you're photographing that are in the picture. I always wait either until there's nobody in my frame or they're in a position within my frame that they're easily photoshopped out. And what I mean by easily is if I'm taking a photo of myself here and there's like some guy walking right here, that's not easily photoshopped out. But if he's way back there, get rid of him. Don't wait for him to leave because sometimes you're not going to have a totally free frame. But be very aware of it because if you have somebody's face in your photo, especially if it's going to be used for commercial use, you're going to get sued. It's going to happen. So be very aware of that. And if you can't avoid it, get them to sign a model release. Sometimes people are very willing to do that as well. So, questions? I'll be very disappointed if nobody's got questions.
Sure.
Yes.
Exactly what kind of equipment do you use for your own? I'm particularly interested obviously about the flashes that you use. So obviously they're battery powered.
Yeah, yeah.
I know you carry a lot of spare batteries with you, but is that the only source you use?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of minimum kit. I use speed lights and I use cheap speed lights. I use a brand mostly Nissan, which is my favorite so far. They're reasonably cheap, but I just found a new one called Yanangu or something like that. They're from China. 30 quid. Amazingly, they have a metal hot shoe, which is awesome because, like I said, my flashes are constantly being blown over, and I've broken so many hot shoe mounts because they're plastic on half the Nikon ones and all my Nissan ones. Yeah, I use really cheap stuff. My flashes are cheap, and I use rechargeable nickel NIMH batteries, AA batteries, no battery packs and that crap. It's too heavy to carry around. You don't need that. In all reality, you don't need that stuff to make a good photo. You need light, you need to be able to control that light, and you need a lens. The least important part of your entire kit, and I'm sorry for anybody that's spent $5 grand on a body, is your body. It's the least important entire part of everything you own. That's the least important. It doesn't matter. Has anybody ever seen, there's a video on YouTube, fashion shoot with an iPhone? Anybody seen that? Watch it. The guy does a fashion shoot with an iPhone. It's all about the light. It's all about the light and how you control the light. So I'm sorry to anybody that's got a 1D or a 3X.
So a big part of getting good photos is clearly like handling the models.
Oh yeah.
Do you have some tips?
For what, posing?
For just setting them at ease, for making
Yeah.
them kind of like, you know.
Well, I'm a bit of a blabbermouth, so I have no problem talking my jaw off to somebody when I first meet them, and that usually puts them at ease right away because they're probably like, "Good God, is this guy gonna shut up?" So that helps, but I don't know. I never really seem to have a problem with it, to be honest, with putting them at ease. I honestly think it's just because I talk to them so much. I think that's a big part of it, is really just talking to them. They feel they can relate to you after a little while, and you just tell stories and ask them questions, get to know them. And after a while, you can get them to do some fun stuff, like the first page again. You can get them to jump on walls and things like that and hit each other with loaves of bread, throwing while juggling oranges. Although that one, to be fair, I know those guys really well. I've done 5 or 6 shoots for them. So that's the other thing, though, is the more you work with somebody, the better and better your photos are going to be with that person. Just because you start to learn from each other, you start to know how they look good, what makes them look the best. They know kind of what you want from them. So yeah, and then posing's a big thing. If you notice, with the exception of that one, because he's sitting on the ground, you never, well, you can, but it's never a good idea to have somebody like this at the camera, because they're never going to be more wide than when they're like this. And it's just the way the body is. I mean, they're never going to be bigger, so you always want a little bit of that. If another good rule is if it bends, bend it. So elbows, knees, necks, bend it, because if you have, I don't have anybody's got anything really straight on them, but if somebody's standing there, like, I don't want to set that, like this is fine, but if the legs are straight and the shoulders are, it looks boring, so you get a kick out a hip, put shoulders down. You practice that, practice in front of a mirror, you do all your female poses. You have to know what looks right. But yeah, never face on to the camera. You always kind of want at least the shoulders turned a little bit away from the camera. The face is another thing. Most of the time it's not the greatest idea to have the face directly on, but there are times that works really well, and that depends on your lighting. Lighting is such a massive part of photography, so much so, and I might be wrong. If I'm wrong, somebody correct me, but I'm pretty sure the Latin meaning of the word photography is painting with light. I mean, it's a massive part of it. And you can take somebody just by where you put, I'm gonna end up getting into my lighting workshop here in a minute. You can make somebody skinnier or fatter just by where you put the light. You can take years off of them or add years on them just by where you put lights. And that's called broad and short lighting. And broad makes you fatter, short makes you skinnier.
Actually, George,
yes.
Stand right against the wall there. It's like that. Can anybody see George's shadows now?
Yes.
Okay, they're pretty hard and defined, aren't they? Okay, George, take a step forward, about a foot. Now where have they gone?
I
They've
can't
gone
see
wider,
so.
but they've gone softer, and that's why studio lighting, we always have them standing much further away from the back than you would normally imagine.
Well, it depends on,
Get rid of the light, isn't it?
especially with, do you guys know what I mean by high key stuff? That white background, horrible stuff that Venture does. The reason why they have you so far from that is so they can make that white. But it's horrible because you're standing out, literally, I mean, you feel a bit exposed when you're out here. I'm sorry if anybody here works for Venture, by the way. Although they're going into administration. That's another thing. Does anybody else have any other questions? There's gotta be more. Yes, oh yeah, you raised your hand before.
You were saying earlier on about using Photoshop. Do you use a mouse or do you use a stylus?
Because I was explaining to you what I do earlier, what don't I? Because of what I do, I use the graphics tablet. And that's a good question, and I'll bring this up. Everybody thinks my stuff is much more Photoshop than it is. The only one that has I would say, reasonable amount of Photoshop is this one, and that's just because I changed the sky. But everybody seems to think my stuff's really Photoshop, but I do three things. The main, boy, my big secret again, I told Don earlier. My thing, first thing I do, hue saturation. Did anybody have Photoshop? All right. Hue saturation layer, set to multiply. When you do that, it's going to make the saturation go through the roof. So throw the saturation slider all the way down. And then it makes the picture very dark. And then I paint with a 5% opacity brush back to bring in all the areas I want. That's the main thing I do. And then I do smooth the skin. But again, that's smoothing skin. Everybody needs to do that, no matter how good a skin you got. And that's it. I mean, then I sharpen. And this one, I did change the sky. And I did change the sky in this one for a reason. The sun literally was right where it is in this photo. But because of that, and because of where it was, remember I talked about using the sun as a light. I used the sun as a second light here to kind of, you can't see because it's so small, but it's a little bit of a rim light on this side. And because I did that, that then blows the sky out. The sky was white. So I dropped in a nice sunset. And we did match all the colors. But yeah, this is what I'm talking about as well with lead-in lines. Like, see, these two are bang in the middle of the photo, which is a no-no. But if you have all the lines leading you there, it's a big thumbs up. Every line leads you right to them. Your eye has nowhere to go but to look at this guy here or this guy here. This one's a bit more complicated, but yeah. Yeah, graphics tablet. That was a long answer. Anybody else? Yes?
Yeah, what size reflectors do you use? Because aren't they a bit awkward to carry around?
Yes, but mine is 24 inch, but it folds down like this big. It's quite tiny. I don't use it that often. I'll tell you when I should have used it is this photo again. In a normal situation, had I had an assistant for this good one, I didn't have one, I would have used the reflector on this because of the shadow under his chin. It's just too much. I would have used the reflector to bring that out a bit. But yeah, the one I use 24, I think it's 24 inch, but it really does fold down to like this big. They're a pain to fold a couple times, but yes.
What do you use for triggering the flash?
I don't use, I'm Nikon, well, although I can use Pocket Wizards, but I use Sepuline, if anybody's heard of them. They make light meters, but they also make a really good trigger called Twin Link. I've thought about changing over to Ellen Crown Skyports because they're about the same price, but I started with Twin Links. I'm kind of stuck with them now because it cost me more money to switch all of my receivers. But yeah, you can get decent ones on eBay. And when I first did off-camera flash, I did go to eBay and buy, I don't even know what the brand of them was. They were like 10 quid. And they were okay, but they misfired quite often. And so I was like, I need to get something better. And I went with a Seculine. It does infrared, it's like Pocket Wizards, it does infrared and it does radio waves, so there's 2 signals going out there. They never misfire unless my batteries are dead. Anybody use Nikon and use the creative lighting system, it's rubbish, don't bother. It's outdoors, it will never work. And it has to have line of sight. Does anybody know what I'm talking about, the creative lighting system from Nikon? If it's not in a line of sight, if it's too bright, they just don't fire. And I don't use TTL through the lens metering for my flashes. I always have them on manual because I'm a control freak, to be honest. Yeah. So triggers on eBay. I'm sorry?
Find the colour of your flashes?
You mean gels and stuff on them? Occasionally. I didn't on any of these. Occasionally, though, I do, especially if you're indoors, it's almost imperative because these lights are very orange, and then you have white flash. So yeah, you put a CTO gel on it so they match. I don't do TerraBluff because I'm usually outdoors most of the time. But yeah, you can, and you can do it just to add some color as well. I have a whole mess of studio gels that are like greens and purples and things like that. So if you wanted accent lights, you can use different colors that'll just give it a little extra something. But, yeah. Yes?
Have you got any tips about when it's pouring with rain?
Yeah. That's a good question because it seems to be pouring rain all the time. Go to where it's not. No. It depends really on where you're at and what your equipment can handle. My camera is waterproof, but I was cheap and I bought a cheap battery pack instead of the proper Nikon battery pack, and that's not waterproof, so I do get a bit paranoid when it starts raining because I know that battery pack's not waterproof. My flashes, most flashes are all waterproof, even my cheap, I can't say the name, Yangandu or whatever they're called, they're completely waterproof. It's just a matter of how wet you want to get, really, I guess, and if you trust your equipment's waterproofness. Otherwise, umbrellas. If you do weddings, is anybody here thinking about doing weddings ever? Good. Yeah? Always have white umbrellas with you. Always, because if it does rain, they actually make really good photos, and they'll love it. You'll take the rainy day of their wedding and make it very happy because you'll have nice pictures of them with umbrellas and things. So yeah, always have umbrellas. Otherwise, if it's raining, try to find somewhere sheltered-ish, and that's when you can find cool locations as well. That actually happened to me. I was doing a fashion thing in Jesus Green, and it started pissing it down, and we ran off into the corner. I don't know what street that is that goes over it, but we did the entire shoot under that bridge, and they were like the best photos of the day. So that's where you can find some cool things, is running for shelter and finding somewhere to do your shoots. Yes?
Use a light meter or you just shoot?
Yes. It's imperative that you use a light meter. I recommend, especially if you're going to use flashes and things off camera. Man, I'm going to get into like everything I talk about in lighting and stuff. Your cameras all have metering modes, and they all have 3 different metering modes. However, the way that your camera meters is wrong, and your camera will always be wrong. And it's true. I'll give you an example. If you were going to measure, say you wanted to measure the amount of water that was going into a bathtub. Now, which would be the better way to measure it? By holding a bucket under the tap and collecting the water that way, or by trying to collect the water that's splashing out of the tub? Obviously, by putting a bucket under and collecting the water there. The way your camera meters is by collecting the water that's splashing out of the tub. Your camera reads the light that's reflecting off the subject. It's not reading the light as it hits the subject. It's just the nature of the beast. That's how cameras are designed. They're not like light meters where you can hold it here and it's absorbing the light. your camera, you point it at her, it's reading the light reflecting off of her, not the light that's hitting her. So it's always going to be wrong by about a third of a stop. If you shoot raw, no big deal. But if you want to control everything, it is a big deal. So I always use a light meter, mainly so I can get things like that where I know the sky and everything's exposed correctly, and then I can adjust my lights from there. But yeah, people probably think I'm crazy with the camera meter thing, but it's true. Yes.
How did you go about getting started in business? How did you build up your customer base from scratch?
That's a good question. That's a long question. I started out doing weddings. I hate weddings. No, I started out doing weddings. Actually, I guess that's kind of wrong. I properly started out doing photos of gigs in Cambridge. That eventually led into weddings, just because one of the bands I became friends with got married, asked me to do the wedding. I said sure, and then that led into weddings. I did weddings for about a year, I would say, while working full time at that time. And it was I was getting more portraits and things like that. I was like, okay, this is good. I did portraits for a few months, and it got to a point where I was having to like turn down work because of work. So I said, okay, I'm just gonna try to make this work. I took a leap of faith, so to speak. Which was good, but also I managed to do it right when the recession happened. So that made things a bit more interesting. And then it's just a matter of really then finding out what it is that you properly want to do. I genuinely started out thinking I wanted to do weddings. And I wouldn't have known that I don't like weddings had I not done them. And that's what's hard, is you kind of have to try everything to see what it is that you're going to like and what you don't like. This sounds bad, like I don't like anything. I don't like weddings and I don't like family portraits, but I had to learn that by doing them. What I do like is the really creative stuff, like editorial portraits and band promos and commercial stuff and advertising stuff. That's the stuff I like, stuff where you get to think and they give you a brief and you have to say, okay, I can make that happen, and that's what you do. Family portraits, some people love them, it's just not my cup of tea. Weddings, photojournalism, that's another one. It's some people's cup of tea. It's not mine. I'm too much of a control freak. I can't take 100 photos, and I take like one, and I'm like, okay. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's to answer your question. I guess it's really a lot of footwork, a lot of word of mouth. It depends on what business it is. Weddings and portraits, it's really word of mouth. You need to keep your customers wanting to spread your name. That's the best way to do it, because you can advertise and search engine optimize your website and all that stuff, but word of mouth is king with weddings and portraits. And even sometimes with commercial stuff, a lot of times play your connections if you have connections, which I've had one and it took me 2 years to finally use it. Just because I was a bit shy to do it. I didn't want to feel like I was using somebody, but use them, because it is about who you know, unfortunately. You can be the greatest photographer out there, and if you don't have the right connections, it's going to be very hard. If you do have the right connection, it will be easy, relatively speaking, depending on the work. So yeah, sorry, I'm rambling now. Anyone else? No one? Have I talked your ears off now?